Apparently she probably didn't have much to eat or drink, and Boaz, God, was taking care of her through Boaz. This is, I don't know about you, this gives me kind of, I love this, because this is how a lot of times God works in our lives too. And sometimes we don't see it, but He does. He cares about us just as much as He did them. At this, she bowed down with her face to the ground, and she asked him, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me a foreigner?" Boaz replied, "I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before." So Boaz, he knows the story now. And now he sees the girl. And what we're going to see here is he not only was helping her because he knew she was relation now. You know, she married into Elimelech's family. But you're going to start to see a love story start here. This is cool. This is really cool what begins out of this. Verse 12 says, Boaz says, "May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." She responded in verse 13, "May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord. You have put me at ease by speaking kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servants." When she walked out of her house that morning, she had no idea what was going to happen. Was it going to be a good day or a bad day? But to see, she walked out in faith. She had faith, and God took care of her. That's amazing. At mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come over here, have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar." Apparently that was kind of a delicacy. Apparently only Boaz and his harvesters would be eating that. No one else. So you see what he's doing? He's picking her out and said, "Come on over here. Have some of our food," because he would have had the best food. When she sat down with the harvester, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all she wanted and had some left over. See, there again, Boaz is really providing for her, because he doesn't, he didn't just give her a small portion of, live on that. He gave her as much as she wanted. In fact, she even had extra, and now this shows the heart of Ruth, because she wanted to take that home to her mother-in-law and share that food with her. So you just see this really cool, you see this really cool thing going on where you had Boaz cared about Naomi and Ruth. Ruth cared about Naomi and with Boaz, and Boaz will care about the other two, right? They're all caring about each other. You see this really neat tapestry starting to develop here. Verse 15, as she got up to glean after lunch, Boaz gave orders to his men, "Let her gather among the sheaves and don't reprimand her. Even pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up." Basically what that means is there were stalks where it was easier to pick up. She would have gleaned a lot more, but the gleaners were only supposed to follow behind and pick up what was less. And what Boaz is saying, let her take some of that. Don't reprimand her. Don't just leave her alone. Isn't that cool? So Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed the barley she had gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah. That's about 30 pounds. She carried it back to town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over after she had eaten enough. Now, Naomi knew how this did work, because she grew up there. So she knew what people were capable of gleaning in a day. And here her daughter-in-law walks in with this 30 pounds. I mean, she had to be going, "Whoa, this girl can go." But there was something else. She not only was seeing the character of Ruth here, she was starting to see the hand of God in this more all the time. Because she said, her mother-in-law asked her, "Where did you glean today and where did you work? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." So then Ruth told her mother-in-law about the one at whose place she had been working. "The name of the man I worked with today is Boaz." And Naomi probably had been going, "Oh my gosh, this is awesome." She goes out, she doesn't know where she's going, what field she's going into, and she ends up in Boaz's field, right? So she's thinking, God's working here, right? And the cool part about this is, in verse 20, Naomi says this, "The Lord bless him." Now that's with an exclamation point. She wasn't just making a statement. She's saying, "The Lord bless him. He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead." Now, contrast that with, if you go back to chapter 1, verse 13, when she was still back in Moab, she said, "The Lord's hand has turned against me." And when she first came back to Bethlehem, in verse 20, she said, "Call me Mara, because the Lord has made my life very bitter. The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune on me." You see this, what's happening? She had all this death in her family, all this adversity, and she's a little bit shaken, with God. And now, here she realizes she's been blessed with an awesome daughter-in-law, and she sees where God is moving in all of this. Because she's starting to put a lot of things together here, okay? Because she understood about what we'll be talking about next time, about the kinsman redeemer. And so she's starting to see this now. And she's like, you just see her start to, the optimism come back in her. You can see the hope, you can hear it because of what she's saying here. Because she said in the latter part of verse 20, "That man is our close relative. He is one of our guardian redeemers." Then 21, Ruth the Moabite said, "He even said to me, 'Stay with my workers until they finish harvesting all my grain.'" So obviously Boaz had some interest in her too, right? So verse 22 says, "Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, 'It will be good for you, my daughter, to go with the women who work for him, because in someone else's field you might be harmed.'" Remember what we talked about? Those kind of perilous times there. And for a young woman to be out there by herself, could be kind of dangerous. So Ruth, verse 23, Ruth stayed close to the women of Boaz to glean until the barley and wheat harvest were finished. And she lived with her mother-in-law. Now, this is really going to pick up when we get into chapters 3 and 4, okay? But you can kind of see what's happening here. And again, in an environment where the society was kind of coming off the rails, politically, economically, there was religious apostasy, there were personal adversities. But all three of these people, these are like the stars shining in the darkness. Naomi, for different people for different reasons. Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz. You get this beautiful story of these people who, even despite the fact that things were hard, they kept their faith in God. They kept their obedience with God. They didn't leave Him. They didn't move away from Him. And that's a big encouragement for us. Regardless of how hard things get, we need to stay focused on God. He wants to work in our lives. And sometimes You know, sometimes one of the things I have a little trouble with some of these, not saying I know more than they do, but some of these TV preachers, they almost act like everything is always supposed to be so easy. And where do they get that? Because in the scripture, there is adversity. There is trouble, right? But God doesn't put us through that because he wants to be mean toward us. He knows that that will draw us closer to him. We grow through adversity. I mean, almost any business book that I've read, they all say the same thing. Even if these guys aren't even Christians, they'll say the same thing. You grow through adversity. That's when we grow, because that's when we find out, well, they'll say that's when we find out what we're made of. But for the believer, that's when we find out when God really shines in our life. He keeps his promise. So, going into this week, my heart is stirred by a noble theme. And we're going to pick this up again next time because there's a lot more here. In fact, like I said, it really starts to pick up fast. So, I just want to thank you for this opportunity. Woo.